Good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming. My name is Celia Fisher. I'm Senior Lecturer at Glasgow Clyde College. I have and still have responsibility for General ESOL, Community ESOL and Teach Training, and I run volunteer training courses as well.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Lynn Marr, and I'm a Senior Lecturer at Glasgow Clyde College at a different campus from Celia. I have experience of working with ESOL learners in the community, but particular responsibility for working with young unaccompanied asylum seekers between the ages of 16 and 19. So today we're going to try and make the last session as useful as possible. We thought we'd start by just looking at some of the rewards and challenges of working with ESOL learners. So I think for all of us who work with this group, we have a very strong sense that we can make a difference and help people integrate into their new life and the new country, and that very often our students are very highly motivated and really want to learn. And they can build very positive relationships with us as teachers and tutors. However, there are also some major challenges, and we're going to touch on some of those this afternoon. So finding suitable resources. We've actually brought a lot of resources with us that we're going to look at later, but that's always a challenge, especially if you're in an area that's cash-strapped or that doesn't have a lot of provision. What can you use with a variety of learners? Within an ESOL class of any kind, you'll have a wide range of levels, from possibly literacy to people who've got undergraduate qualifications, postgraduate qualifications, and Celia's going to talk a little bit about that. And finally, this ostrich or saviour. And what I mean by that is that our learners, particularly those that come from a refugee background, which are the ones that we're talking about today, have got many, many issues. Their lives are very complex. And so the tendency could be, that's not my job, that's the ostrich. I'm here to teach you English. Or, this must be so difficult for you, let me help you with everything. And so what we're going to try and talk about today is how can you find a balance between those two positions so that you're able to do your job effectively without feeling that you're absolutely on your knees because of what your learners bring with you.
We're fairly conscious that we've had some extremely interesting talks this morning, and that you might actually learn nothing from Lynn and myself. However, you never know. Yes, we're talking about, we've gone one too far, actually.
Sorry. Yeah.
We're talking about diverse educational backgrounds. Indeed, you might have your postgraduate in the same class as somebody who has no literacy in L1, and that obviously is an extremely challenging situation to manage. Many of your learners will have had interrupted education. That might be because of war, it might be because of poverty, it might be because possibly a gender bias as well. And the key thing here, and I think it was Jonathan who touched on this, is that if your learners have not learnt before, then that whole issue of study skills and teaching them how to learn can take up an awful lot of your time. And of course, as I said, you've got those who do know how to learn in the same class. Don't forget that your one kind of unifying factor here is that they're all very, very motivated and, in our experience, extremely good at giving peer support. That is something that will give those supporting a sense of control and purpose that they might find not available in the rest of their rather difficult lives when they come here. Jagged profiles, any teacher here will know what we mean by that. In other words, in your 4 skills, and forgive me, Alison, I mean, we are still talking about 4 skills, more or less, listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Just because somebody presents to you with very good reading and writing skills, it may not be that they actually can communicate particularly well, and of course, vice versa. You might have fantastic conversations with someone and then be very surprised that they are unable to read or write. Don't make any assumptions about how somebody presents to you initially, although I think it was Duncan who talked about spending a month assessing, and you do need that, absolutely. They, of course, have so many difficult life situations. They are in a different environment. They may have come from a city and find themselves in a rural environment, or vice versa. They're in a very different climate that can affect people adversely, different culture, systems that they'll have absolutely be bamboozled by, aren't we all? They will probably be, well, they will be on benefits, and again, that will be a novel situation probably for them. Sense of isolation, grief, trauma, and I think the other thing is, of course, their loss of status, and again, that was mentioned this morning. These are people who will have been employed, may well have been in fairly wealthy situations, and all of a sudden, that identity is taken away from them. They will come to your classrooms with quite a lot of what I call baggage. And I don't mean to be negative, but that is there all the time. And finally, we're looking at the expectations of the learner, and absolutely, Jonathan touched on that. Very high. They have remarkably high expectations, which is an extremely good thing. But I think we have to try and help them understand that their educational journey will be a long one. And yes, they will want to be regaining some kind of status and identity, but they maybe need to understand that will take years and years. And I think Lynn and I have a group where we've got 5 or 6 would-be doctors in that group. Well, none of them are doctors in their own country, but that's what they aspire to. Fantastic, but they need to know that that's going to take an awful long time. So, what do students already know and don't know? That's key. You need to get to know your students. Make no assumptions. I've said that earlier. And of course, remember that just because they might have a low level of English, it does not mean they have a low level of intelligence. It can be an easy mistake to make. And again, very often what they've come from might well mean that they are not vocalizing very much at the beginning. They may be very, very quiet, and they're taking a long time to then come forward with what they do already know. Equally, you've got somebody who tells you that they have got a degree in accountancy, but they may not be able to tell the time. The language that they've had in their country may all be in terms of papers, written language, and actually their speaking skills are not what you might expect. So in terms of the strengths and weaknesses, we do know that they will have varied strengths and weaknesses in terms of the 4 skills. And what you really need to remember is that they may vary over time. So initially they may present as very confident listening with very good listening and speaking skills, but actually they are limited. And you need to be aware that their skills will change over time, and that our job is to maximize their learning opportunities, which brings us to the third point. They often expect far more ESOL provision than you are able to provide with them, and therefore you have to maximize their independent learning opportunities. You have to provide them maybe with ESOL readers, with, if they've got IT opportunities, with websites, etc. Readers, we find work very well. Because they may expect so much more than what you're able to give, you do have to maybe manage that disappointment, but also to signpost to other opportunities and use, as we heard this morning, befriending systems, etc., that are out there for them.
So moving on from that, I'm going to talk about the effects of trauma, grief and loss. And in my particular role of working with young people, as well as working with adult learners, over many years, we've developed some techniques and some approaches to this, which I'm going to share with you, just purely on the basis that they may be useful. But let's just first of all name them. So for some people, there may be some difficulty in concentrating and retaining information. And what that means as a teacher is that you need to revisit something more than once and maybe in many different ways. Many people might have undiagnosed post-traumatic stress disorder or other mental health conditions. But equally, they may not. So I think it's also very important not to make an assumption that everybody arriving from a refugee situation has got some mental health problems or some post-traumatic stress. Very often people will have physical ill health, and of course, as with any other student, that can have an impact on attendance, on ability to complete work, for example. Additionally to that, anxiety about the family in their own country, anxiety about a new life here, and how can you manage this in class? So I'm going to talk a little bit more about this because I think this is one of the big things that really ESOL practitioners, wherever they are, struggle with. So going back to the ostrich and the saviour, of course what you want to be offering is empathy and sympathy, and you want to listen to your learners. But at the same time, it's not a therapy room. It's a classroom, wherever you are. So that's about how do you establish those boundaries with your learners. This is what we're doing here. Also, just some very simple techniques. We've quite often found that young people and adults can be in a classroom and they look like they're staring into space. Now, that could be because they're thinking, I'm really hungry, what am I going to have to eat for my tea? Or it could be that they are somewhere else. So a really simple technique, which I'm sure people will learn, is, or maybe already do, is just a tap on the shoulder and bringing the person back to the classroom, to the situation that you're in. Also, giving people the opportunity to take time out. If they're looking distressed, if they say, many of our students say, it's my head, teacher, my head, and we go, okay, just take a minute, go and have a glass of water, take some time out, go and get some fresh air. It's about being flexible within the situation that you find yourself in. So, the role of the ESOL teacher. I love this quote by Melanie Cook, and I found it very helpful. The classroom time is lesson time. It's the time when they can just be a student and switch off. Now, obviously, for some people that's not possible, but in my experience and Celia's experience, what we find is that our students really want to come to class because when they're in class, they are students. They're not refugees. They're not people with multiple levels of grief and loss. They're students learning English. At the same time, of course, you've got to balance that with the context that they're in. But instead of always looking at students in a position of deficit of what they don't have, your classroom can provide a place where students can feel that they can show what they do know and what they have been and what they aspire to be. But it's important for you as practitioners to know where you can signpost your students to. And the reality is maybe there isn't enough. So it's about finding out what there is in the area that you work in, and if there isn't enough, who do you raise that with? Setting clear boundaries about what their class time is. What's it for and when is it? So we're not talking about that at the moment, we're talking about this. So in the scenarios that Celia and I are going to give each group in a minute, you'll see maybe how that particular strategy can come into play. I think everybody would agree that learning doesn't take place unless your classroom or the place that you're learning is calm and safe. So that's about managing maybe difficult things that might happen in a classroom, maybe interactions between people because of a misunderstanding with language or because of a cultural assumption. It's about re-establishing this is a place where we learn. and I know people have talked about this morning, about the classroom isn't four walls. I think this is really important because when I take students out, it's one of the great opportunities that I find they can tell me things that I would never find out about them. So when we go out to a museum or we go out to a park or whatever it is that we do, there's a conversation that can happen there that doesn't happen sometimes in a classroom, both with each other and with me. And finally, this, remember to take care of yourself. This is about how we all teach ESOL, or we're involved in this because we care. And there's a price for that. And sometimes we have to be able to say, I can't do any more here. And sometimes that means talking to somebody else who you're working with, talking to your manager, but making sure that you're taking care of you. Because if you don't take care of you, you're not going to be able to take care of them. It's a very obvious thing to say, but sometimes I think we need permission to do that, to say, I can't do this. Okay, so we're going to move on to talking about resources now.
Your guide that Tara, etc., has produced has a great list of useful resources. We've brought one or two other things that we feel are quite useful, and really we're very happy to share them with you. I think our first point is that be wary when you're using literacy resources, that they are not adult literacy resources produced for Scottish or UK literacy learners. Those ones are extremely difficult to use effectively in an ESOL classroom. Unfortunately, there are very few adult literacy ESOL resources, and I'm sure many of you, like myself, Lynn, and all of us teachers, we spend hours producing our own. SQA literacy resources are very good, and there are a couple of other ones, Lisa Carlson's pack, etc. But you do need to, if you're going to go and look at UK literacy resources, do be wary, is all I would say. We are great believers in readers. Reading helps all skills, I would say, and your local libraries may well have ESOL readers. If not, beg your manager or whoever for some money to spend on ESOL resources, readers. In my community classes, I kind of take my reader library with me. So I might only have 15, 20 readers, but we have a kind of a borrowing system on a week-by-week basis. They'll take one away, bring it back the following week, and that works well. The ESOL Activities book that we've got there and Exploring British Culture book, they've got some really practical, situational, what used to be called functional language, which is worth having a look at. There are, of course, ESOL course books, not great in many ways for the kind of learners you have in front of you. On the other hand, before you kind of knock them completely, they are a coat hanger, and they can provide some kind of structure to a course, and then you pick and mix. So don't dismiss the ESOL course books out of hand. British Council Nexus, great website, lots of really, really good stuff on that you can use, including videos, listenings, etc. And Lynn's going to just...
Okay, and if you're lucky enough to have access to technology wherever you work, can I really make a plea to use Mr. Bean? Okay, this may sound a bit daft, but one of the reasons that Mr. Bean works a treat is because there's very little language. So you can use it with every level. So you can use it with literacies level, where you can say, what do you think Mr. Bean is saying? You can use it with more advanced level. That's one use of it. But also, it's fun. And ESOL learners want to have fun in the classroom, as well as learn English. So there are lots of things like Mr. Bean, but I've used Mr. Bean with every level. And I can guarantee that students respond really well to it. A completely other kind of resource is this beautiful book by Sean Tan called The Arrival, which has no language in it whatsoever. So it's like a graphic novel. And I've brought a copy for people to have a look at. In my own college, some people are worried about using this book because there's some quite dark pictures in this book. But actually, when I've used it with all ages, they have responded really well to it because it's a story of migration. But it's not a linear story and it's not a literal story. So there's some fantastical drawings in there, but it's a beautiful book and it can be used in many, many different ways. I'm a great believer in using music because most people respond to music. It could be a cultural exchange where one of your students brings in a song from a particular favourite from their own culture, and you bring in a song that's quite simple depending on the level. And I brought some examples of songs and also some examples of things you can do with songs that are on the table. And all you need really is a cassette player, a DVD player, even if you're out in the middle of the community, and a song. And again, it's just a nice thing to do. It's a different thing to do in a classroom. Worksheets, because of who I work with, in particular with young people, there's very, very limited specific resources for this group. So I'm constantly either adapting or creating. And again, it does take time, but once you've got the hang of it, it's not that difficult. You can do it, okay? And again, there's lots of stuff on the table, so please, if you want to know any more, ask us. One more thing I'm going to say, and this is not for everybody, but people might want to try it. One of the things that I do quite a lot in my classroom is use creative arts. So sometimes I get people to make things, and it's quite amazing how they respond to it. And I'm talking about adults as well as young people. So for example, I might get people to make something that I call a suitcase, which is just a piece of a folder that they then create into a 3D, almost a 3D suitcase. And it's what did you bring with you? And they put pictures from magazines, they put words, we write about it. So being creative in a classroom is also, it's not for everybody, and some people might feel a little bit intimidated by that. I think it's always worth a try because there's lots of language that can come out of that. It's a different kind of learning, but it's like going outside. It's about taking a risk and see what works with your learners. So we're going to give you some possible scenarios now for you to discuss on your tables.
So in good kind of ESOL tradition, I'm really sorry about this, but we're going to ask for feedback. Can you make sure you've got somebody willing to give feedback from your table? That person has to promise to speak for less than half a minute because we don't have time. Our first scenario, so we'd like each table to talk about the scenario, and then we're going to give other scenarios that you can just talk in private. This scenario, you have a student wants to stay behind after class to tell you about his problems or her problems with their housing situation. He is not happy with the area he lives in and would like to move. He's a low-level learner. You've already given him a lot of time and attention. Sound familiar? First of all, we'd like you to discuss what your response might be. And secondly, what are the challenges for you in helping him in your particular locality? Because we're all from different areas, and what might work in one area might not work in another. You have about 3 minutes to talk about it, plus choose your spokesman. And as Tara said this morning, you have to operate the button on your table. Terrible ESOL classes, you're awful noisy. Okay, so if we could start with the table at the back, please.
Hello. I think we're going to share this because we had quite a lot of discussion there. I think that a lot of the answer to this is knowing who the person is to pass that issue on to, The other one is that we know from experience that if there's an issue for an individual, they will often speak to lots of different people about it. So you discover that everybody's trying to do the same thing. So it's that communication and network amongst those of you who are working.
And we just added that sometimes it's not because there's something totally not right about the learner. It's just that they're anxious and they don't understand how things work. And they just feel, well, why isn't this sorted? And they feel the more people they can talk to, it might just be, you know, they might get to the light bulb and that will be like a magic wand, you know, sort it out. So sometimes it's understanding that it's just, they're just trying, they're very anxious, they don't know how things work, so they will just knock on anyone's door to get a solution.
I think as well it's understanding how slowly the wheels of whatever work, and it's not my fault that I haven't done something, it's the person who I asked to do it, and you go through this whole chain of people.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Any other table like to volunteer? We've got to elect. Yes.
Yeah, the issues in our tables, we work in different authorities, so the process is...
Sorry, microphone.
Yeah, one of the issues at this table is that we work in different authorities, and so the processes and the can be different. So what we would do in Scottish Borders would be different to what East Asia, but it comes to the same thing in terms of signposting and finding the person. And someone also suggested it might have been something that just happened the night before that has caused this problem. So, you know, might not be something that's been sort of building up for a while, and it might just be something immediate that could be dealt with quite simply, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's you know.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's so true. Very, very often what appears to be a problem is actually symptomatic of something maybe quite different, and once you've unpicked it, they don't necessarily want to move house. Anybody else like to offer any? At the back there, thank you.
Yeah, we wondered whether this would be an opportunity to react to the learner's needs and then create a lesson around what they're needing. Kind of dogma style, reacting to what they're saying, and it's they're making the course, not you.
Yes, great idea.
And actually, there is that very lesson, almost, in the ESOL activities book that we brought with us about sizes of houses, different types of houses. So absolutely, it is a good opportunity. Yeah.
Anybody else like to offer? Yeah.
Unfortunately, been only housing rep at this table. Everybody just stared at me. I think we were just talking about practitioners being able to reassure people that they will pass on the query to the appropriate person to try and get some sort of resolvement, because what you don't want to do is give people false information, especially on the complexity down about housing and allocations and house sizes and overcrowding and everything else. So yeah, just make sure practitioners know who they can contact, either directly or via their managers.
Thank you, yes. Did anyone pick up the fact it was a low-level learner? Anyone like to comment on that?
What does it mean, low level of English or?
Yes, low level of English. I just wondered if that would make a difference to how you reacted. No. Yes, Mandy.
Yep, so at our table we said that the person should make sure that they have an interpreter with them when being referred, or with the housing colleague, make sure that the housing people have an interpreter there to make sure that their message is heard.
Absolutely.
Yep, and that's great. Sometimes that's not possible, so that's the ideal. But obviously there are different issues with low-level learners than there are with people who have a better command of English. Okay, so on the table, we've given you another 5 scenarios. Now, we know you're not going to get to discuss 5 scenarios. So what we're going to suggest is that you possibly look at them and choose which one you'd like to discuss, which one you feel might be most relevant to most of you. We're not going to feed back in a big group because we don't have time, but what we'd like you to do, on your table, there's big pieces of flip chart paper. And if people have suggestions that they think would be useful for other people to know about in how to tackle that problem, if you could write the number of the scenario and what the suggestions are, and Tara is going to collect them at the end. Okay? So if you'd like to choose. I mean, it depends on how long it takes you to discuss them, but choose whichever scenario, and then we'll do a little bit of feedback. So we're going to have 10 minutes for this. Thank you. And we'll come round and speak at the tables as well. Some interesting discussions going on around the tables. And of course, people are coming from very different backgrounds. It's interesting to hear that not everybody here is an ESOL practitioner, for example, so they may have a very different perspective and responsibility in those situations that we've given you. We don't really have time for feedback, so what we would just like to offer you are our responses, basically. They're not the right answers, they are just from our own experience. And then we'd just like to have a small bit of time where people can ask any kind of questions that they'd like to ask. Okay, so we've talked about one. Okay, so let's look at number one. There's a unit on family in your course book. You know some of your students have lost close family members. Now, I know there's some guidance in the book that you were given on this. That's a tricky one. I think that's about handling it sensitively, but everybody has a family. So actually, it's part of what it means to be human. And in my experience and Celia's experience, people want to talk about their families. So I think you have to be sensitive to that, but at the same time, not avoid it. The second one, which is about a student has recently received very bad news and is very distressed. I think that's about, again, being sympathetic and empathetic. And a table over there that I was talking to said it's about acknowledging that actually that person has come to college, which means A, they really want to learn, and B, they want to be with other people. So I think acknowledging that, giving the student in that situation the opportunity to step outside, perhaps, to share with you or another member of the class, and to manage it, but to make sure that they know that they can talk to you at the end of class, perhaps, or they can take some time. In my experience, when a student has been distressed, they'll say, I'm fine, and then you leave them and you go back and just check how they're doing. So I'll hand you over to Celia for the others.
The one about a student presenting as very sleepy and then disclose to you that they are suicidal. There are, of course, loads of issues here, and you have to handle this extremely carefully. But the reason we put this one up was the very sleepy. That was the key. You do need to check medication, and in fact, in this real-life situation, somebody had overdosed on paracetamol, so it was an ambulance situation. It wasn't anything else. You had to phone 999. And obviously, in a suicide situation, you may be in an environment where you have mental health advisors there, and you can bring them in. You may have interpreters, but equally you may not. And I think all I can say is that be very careful. Obviously, you don't leave them on their own. Sorry, Lynn's saying time. Okay, number 4. Right, where are we? Number 4. Oh, yes. Phone, and phone. You have to find out where that student is, one way or another. You may well find somebody in the class can help you with that one, but you need to locate the well-being, where that student is and their well-being, basically. And the last one, yes, this is really all about classroom management, and hopefully you have established some classroom rules, if you like, and certainly for me, politics is something that doesn't enter the classroom, and they need to know that, and if they want to talk politics or engage in politics, that happens outside the classroom because it's not fair on everybody else.
Okay, so as we said, they're not the definitive answers. It's far more complex than that, as we appreciate. Before we finish, we just wanted to put back our email addresses in case anybody wanted to contact us, but also just to have a couple of minutes to see if anybody had any questions.
Hi, Lynn. Hi, Celia. Just on the point that you were making about developing your own resources for this group in terms of literacy, would it be a good suggestion to put a request or a call out to the people in the room, the practitioners, that if they do develop or put together any resources to maybe to send to you or to send to me or to work together so that we could maybe pull them together and try and disseminate them?
Absolutely. I think if I could suggest that they send them to you, Mandy,
Okay.
that would be great.
I'd like for your advice as well, Lynn.
Yes, absolutely. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We're all doing it, so why not share it? Yes.